It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy. Back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew in version 1.0 decklist with the commander in front of us in my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, so I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're finishing up pre-con week. I wanted to get at least one commander in here on pre-con week. And as I was thinking about what commander to do, I thought Choco just made a ton of sense. Here's a fun one, and then we'll get into more fun next week. Choco's a 4-mana Bant 3/5 bird. It says whenever one of our birds we control attack, we'll get that many cards on the top of our library. We can put one of them into our hand, any number of lands on the battlefield tapped, and the rest into our graveyard. And whenever a land comes in, Choco gets a buff until end of turn. I think as a concept, Choco seems really interesting. I really like the I really like the digging off the top. I think it's a really interesting mechanic. The only thing I kind of wish Choco had is I wish it buffed all your birds. I know that's kind of, I guess it could have a high upside, but I think what it's going to force us to do is find a way to do what you probably would want to do with any tribal deck that goes wide, which is going to be trying to find a way to buff all of our birds, potentially on landfall if possible, but just get them in the combat. Yes, we already have the evasion of being in the air, which I think is very helpful. But we're going to try to get our birds in, get them attacking, get as many of these land drops at a time, and start having some fun. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in checking out our videos just a little bit early, check that out down in the video, in the description below. Well, truthfully, most of our birds that we really are going to want to play are in these colors, right? We saw Castrol in Bloomborough and Azorius. You know, a lot of our birds, like, you know, we have old commanders like Derevi that are in Bant. So most of our birds are in these colors. And so I think we're going to kind of play the who's who of birds or really useful birds. You have things like Aven Interrupter that can come in and plot a spell that's on the stack, and then all of our opponents' spells that cast from graveyards or exile cost 2 more to cast. Aven Mind Sensor is going to shut down our opponents searching their libraries. Birds of Paradise lets us tap for a mana of any color. Of course, we're playing Derevi. Whenever it enters or whenever a creature we control hits a player, we get to tap or untap a target permanent. Very interesting ability and can lead to some fun lines there. Empyrean Eagle giving all of our other creatures with flying +1/+1. Falcospara, another Bant bird option we have, allowing it to get a shield counter on it when it enters, and then we can look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can play the top card as long as we remove a counter from a creature we control. This is going to work really well with something like Castrol and some of the other things that, you know, Landfall can put counters on things. You know, we have some sub-synergies there. Gilded Goose can also tap for a mana. It just has to sacrifice a food, but it comes in and makes a food, and you could tap it to make food. Guahir gives all our other birds vigilance, and it's a nice body on its own right. Judge's Familiar may look like a pretty weak 1/1, but it can counter an instant or sorcery unless its controller pays 1. So right at the right time, Judge's Familiar can be really useful for us. Kanji, leader of that starter commander deck they made. Whenever it attacks, all of our creatures with flying that are also attacking get +2/+0, and whenever it blocks, all of our blocking creatures with flying get +0/+2. There's Castrol, the Bloomborough commander, very popular bird commander in its own right. Whenever one of our birds we control hit a player in combat, we get to choose one. Put a bird from our hand or graveyard onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Put a counter on each bird we control or draw a card. I mean, these are just 3 great abilities, and I think Castrol fits really great in the 99 of this one. Ledger Shredder says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, it connives. So remember to connive, you're going to draw and then pitch a card. If you pitch a non-land card, you get to put a counter on Ledger Shredder. Mockingbird can come in as a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Mockingbird. Can be really nice depending on the time. It can come in as a copy of your thing, come in as an opponent's thing. Right, there's so many options that Mockingbird can get for you. Roaming Throne is going to double up not only Choco's trigger, but all the rest of the birds in our deck, making up for a lot of value. Shipraz says whenever we draw a card, we put a counter on Shipraz and gain a life, which is really nice. And then it can give out flying to another human. We don't really care about that. That's meant more for its partner. But just getting it to be bigger whenever we draw cards is really nice, considering right, you get to draw at least 1 every turn, and then we have other ways in our deck to draw cards. Here's one of the new summon creatures in Fat Chocobo. Whenever it comes in, you make a 2/2 bird with Whenever a land you control enters, this token gets +1/+0. We're going to see this in some of the new birds we'll talk about in a second. And then for 3 turns, it just gives all of our creatures trample. Not as important with our birds, right? Because most of them are going to be in the air. But I do think it's going to help in those odd games where we run into like Thopters or other 1/1 flyers. I think it'll help us get through for more damage. Warden of Evocile and Washer of the Spheres both reduce creature spells with flying we cast. And then Watch the Spheres gets a little buff whenever the creature with flying comes into our control. But again, a way to reduce our birds is nice so we can get more of them out and get the party going. But of course, a lot of the new Final Fantasy birds care about landfall. Obviously, it makes sense with Choco as our commander, right? But the only non-bird we're playing in the deck is a Myria Angel, only because whenever a land comes in, we make a bird token, so that makes sense, right? It's doing exactly what Choco wants to do. Sox Chocobo and then Traveling Chocobo, 2 of our new birds from the set. Sox Chocobo just grows whenever a land comes in. Great ability, right? Especially considering we're going to hopefully get multiple during combat. And then Traveling Chocobo, one of the big premier birds from the new set, especially with those pretty new serialized versions. Let's just look at the top card of your library anytime. Play lands and birds off the top. But it says if a land or bird entering causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, goes off an additional time. This is really nice, allowing us to get more value of our lands coming in and hopefully make Choco a nice threat if we can see them out at the same time. Chocobo Racetrack just makes us one of those bird tokens with that ability whenever a land comes in. And then we have the new side quest, Raise a Chocobo. So it comes in and makes one of those tokens. And then if at the beginning of our first main phase we have 4 more birds, we could flip it over into Black Chocobo, which lets us just go get a land and put it in the battlefield tapped, and then it has that same ability. So kind of an interesting thing, can get multiple birds out of it, and then more of those landfall abilities just work really great, right? When Choco's going to hopefully get us multiple, lands in per combat. But I think we're going to finish it out with just trying to put some raw power on our creatures across the board. We have things like Rally of Wings, which can untap them all and give them a nice buff on a turn where we take a big attack, but we still want to be back to block. Banner of Kinship comes in, right, and you choose a type, you get a fellowship counter for each creature that type you control, and then just all your creatures of that type get a buff for each fellowship counter on it. Put it down at the right time, and then your birds are going to get that nice buff for the rest of the game. Patchwork Banner giving that flat +1/+1 buff and helps us tap for a mana of any color. Beastmaster Ascension seems right when you have a commander that cares about kind of going wide. I think it makes sense. Put a quest counter on it whenever a creature we control attacks, and once you get to 7 quest counters, all of our creatures get +5/+5. Again, I think that's going to mix really well with being in the air. Note that most of these new Final Fantasy birds are not in the air, right? Because the Chocobos are rideable creatures in Final Fantasy, right? But it is good to note that that will still matter on the ground, right? Especially when we can add things like Trample. Broker's Ascendancy just giving them a counter on each end step, kind of pairing with that Falco-Spara line, but I think just very helpful to continue to buff them up. Same thing with Feldar Retreat. Just whenever a land comes in, you can just put a counter on each creature you control and give them Vigilance. Of course, the Vigilance isn't going to matter if these are lands coming in off Choco's effect after we've already attacked, but I think the counters are massive. If you have 3, even 2 or 3 lands coming off Choco's effect, you're talking about a +3/+3 buff to our entire board already in the middle of combat. And that can make a huge difference in the course of just 1 or 2 combats at some of the damage we can deal. Murmuration gives all our birds +1/+1 in Vigilance, and then beginning of our end step, we make a Storm Crow for each spell we've cast this turn. Just an interesting ability. I think the Vigilance is almost well worth it. And then the fact that, as we're doing the things we already want to be doing, playing spells and things like that, we're just getting more birds that way. Radiant Destiny hands out +1/+1 to the chosen type, and once we hit that City's Blessing, they also get Vigilance. And then Soul Catcher's Airy, whenever one of our birds dies, we get to put a counter on it, and all of our birds get a +1/+1 for each counter on it. So again, just ways to really buff our birds and make them a real threat. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at Choco, and I think going into testing, we'd really want to see, do we have enough landfall payoffs? The one landfall payoff that didn't make it in, but man, I see the use of it is Retreat to Emeria. It has a landfall ability that just gives your creatures +1/+1 on a turn. Again, with Choco's attack ability, that feels like spot on for exactly what we want. And I feel like it may become something that makes more sense over some other things. Herald's Horn just reducing our birds by a little bit. We have some other things in there that help reduce, but maybe we see we need something more. And then the one thing that I probably didn't focus on that we could focus a little bit more on is just straight up ramp spells. We do have a good amount being in a green deck already, but we could also play more, really play into these new Final Fantasy birds that get these buffs off these ramp spells and try to lean into a little bit more in testing. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. I kind of like the idea of trying to find more ways just to flat out buff our birds and kind of go that route, especially when we can start going wider with Choco's effect. But I think that what's cool is there's so many ways to look at it, and you can find what flavor you want out of your deck for them. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not to show off our best plays, but it's to get in some game scenarios and kind of understand what hands are we looking to keep and how are we looking to set up our game plan. This hand looks pretty good to me. We got a 3-lander with Nature's Lure, so we've got some ramp to get the Choco if we don't see it. We got Skycat Sovereign, which gets a buff for each other creature we control with flying, and we can actually pay mana to get bird tokens. We got Raise the Palisade for a nice one-sided mass bounce. And then we got the Fat Chocobo. So kind of interesting, right? We got an interesting spread. Obviously, we'd like to see more birds, but I think we've kind of got the mana that we need for Choco to start digging. Remember, when you reveal those cards, you get to put one in your hand and then all the lands down. So if there's only 1 and 2 birds stacking, we really get to like sculpt what we want off the top. Well, all right, we top an island, which is really nice. I think it's just a Canopy Vista for me here, turn 1. Turn 2, we see Command Tower. So now we've got plenty of mana. I'm trying to decide if I even need to go Nature's Lore here. If I play the Hinterland Harbor and I go for Skycat, what am I doing next turn? I'm not really sure, but if I go Nature's Lore, I could potentially just go Choco next turn, right? And get the party started that way. So maybe we do that. Remember, with a Ram spell like Nature's Lore, if you have your Tri-land, you want to go for that, right? Since it's got the typing. We top another land. Here I think I'll just go for Choco, get the party started, right? Start setting up for next turn. We can hopefully get some more. And we are now just flooding, but that's A-okay. I was trying to decide between Skycat and Fat Chocobo, but I kind of think I like the Fat Chocobo a little bit more. That comes in and gives me that 2/2 bird, which can start attacking next turn, right? Now Choco attacks by itself. We get to look at that many cards on the top of our library. Remember, we could put any of them, number them into our hand, and then put a number of lands back in tap, and the rest go into our graveyard. So there you go. So now Choco's a 4/5. Get into attack. Now this would have gotten the buff as well, right? But it wasn't attacking, so it's not really going to matter. Now we get another bird in Strike Force, flying double strike vigilance. So kind of a nice little attacker if we can get it buffed up. This is now on level 2. Remember, with all these Saga creatures, right? The first turn they don't have haste, so that can do anything. So now it's just a 4/4 that has trample, which isn't bad in its own right. We've got 7 mana. I don't mind the idea of going like Strike Force plus Skycat Sovereign just to get ourselves a little bit better for next turn. Note that this bird and Choco would have both gotten that +1/+0 from the Deserted Beach. And I think I would just attack with the 3 of them here. We're going to Choco for 3 cards. We see Flawless Maneuver, Feldar Retreat, and a Selesnya Sanctuary. Well, I like the idea of the retreat. The retreat's going to really start buffing our creatures, right? I love Flawless Maneuver for the protection, but I feel like we just need to do that. We'll pop a land back to our hand with the Sanctuary. Now these guys are +2/+0 this turn, right? So a 5/5 and a 4/2 with trample. And hopefully we get some good attacks in. Then as we come to this turn, I go Feldar Retreat. I don't really have anything else I want to play, so I'm thinking Feldar Retreat, Patchwork, play the land. That's going to trigger these 2. We're still on trample. We're on lore 3 for the Fat Chocobo, so he goes away next turn. When this comes in, I'm kind of thinking about just putting a counter on everything, right? Giving it vigilance. So now they're going to take some nice attacks this turn. They also have the buff from the Patrick banner, right? So I would just swing all 5 of them, which means we're going to start digging on Choco's ability. Remember, we get to put 1 to hand, then any number of lands on the battlefield. So we're getting a huge buff here off the Feldar Retreat. Would we rather have the Ascendancy or the Aven Mindstalk? I think we'd rather have the bird, right? And then we have 3 lands come in, which means we get our choice in the Feldar Retreat. I think the answer is just, right, 3 more counters. That's 3 more buffs for Choco and the bird token for 3 lands coming in. So they're at +4/+0 this turn. So they're hopefully just dealing big damage. And I think this is what we want to see from this deck. Lands coming in off the attack, buffing our board, and trying to continue to push our advantage. There's probably a world where we look to raise the Palisade instead. But with most of them being in the air and the ones on the ground having trample, I'm really not worried about this, especially with all these counters. And I think the wider you go with the boards, the birds, the more of these turns where you see multiple lands coming in is going to happen. I think that seems pretty fair on that one. Let's get into playtest number 2. Here we're keeping a 3-lander with Patchwork Banner again. There's that Sox Chocobo. We got Roaming Throne and then Murmuration. I don't mind this hand. We've got basically 4 mana right here. We've got some great plays here. The nice thing about this Sox Chocobo is when we crack this Fabled Passage, we should be able to get a couple counters on them that way. So my turn 1 play, I feel like is the Chocobo. I guess there's a world where you start with the Seaside Citadel untapped, but I think it's just the Chocobo, right? We could start growing this over the course of a couple turns. Turn 2, we see the Warden of Evosal, so reducing the cost of our birds with flying. Of course, not going to work for Choco, right? Because it doesn't have flying. But I think we just get the land in, get the counter on the Chocobo, right, and just keep it growing. Here on turn 3, we play the Orchard, get that bonus. I'm kind of thinking the Patchwork Banner just to make it a little bit bigger. And now it's a 3/4. It could attack this turn, if we wanted to. Otherwise, let me think. I could get Choco down. I'm trying to decide, do I crack the Fabled Passage and get something like Murmuration down and just buff up this Chocobo? Or do I, crack the Fabled Passage, get a couple counters on here and just get Choco down? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know that I have really want to. I don't know that I've made that decision yet. If I'm going to do this and just attack, I almost feel like maybe even Roaming Throw might be the better chance. Double up on those landfall abilities. Grow the Chocobo even higher, and then Roaming Throw will be a bird, and we'll be able to trigger Choco next turn. That could make sense. If I crack the passage, I could get down the Sovereign and the Warden of Evosal to have more birds to attack for next turn. I kind of think that might be the play. Crack the Fabled Passage for... I'm going to guess I have all my colors here, so we'll just go get another one. That's my 4th land off the passage, so it's going to come in untapped. My thought is just do that. That way we have more birds, right, for next turn that can attack, right, and get an even bigger Choco trigger. Here we see Bart's and Boko, affinity for birds, so it's coming down for just 2 green right now. And whenever it enters, each other bird deals damage equal to its power to target creature player controls. So if I do this, I can get a counter on this guy, and then I can go Choco plus Bart's and Bako so I can nail somebody. But the nice part here is I have 3 birds that can attack this turn, so we'll go 3 on the Choco trigger. We see Swords of Plowshare, Swan Song, and Path of Ancestry. So we know the path's coming in no matter what. I think I'll keep the removal. Bin the Swan. This will come in tap. This will get its counter. This will get the buff, even though it's not attacking. Right now, the Skycat is a 2/2, so not as good, right? Especially with some of our birds, or 3/3, but still not bad attacks. So we really want some trample for this Chocobo, right? Now that it's really growing. But we'll come to our next turn. I think Roaming Throne could make a ton of sense here. Double up the landfall off of the Chocobo and Choco. Double up on Choco's attack ability, because that's going to be a triggered ability. So that makes a ton of sense to me. We can leave up some mana to hold up, stuff like this. But we go to attack. I probably attack with all 5 of these here, which means we're going to go off 5. We're going to go off 5 twice. This is an interesting one. I like Spar. I like the Mind Sister, but I really like the Flawless Maneuver. I feel like it's one of those things that's going to be nice to protect our creatures. There's 2 lands coming in, which remember is going to trigger land. Each of them is going to trigger landfall twice. So now this Chocobo is becoming huge, right? And Choco gets a +4/+0 buff. And then we get to do Choco's ability again. Mockingbird's interest. So Wing Portent's interesting, drawing us a card for each creature we control, which is huge. Could draw us a ton of cards. Don't really need the 3 visits. Mockingbird's interesting. It could come in as a copy of the Chocobo. It could come in as a copy of like Skyscat Sovereign if we want to have another copy of it. It could technically come in as a copy of Roaming Throne if we wanted to get another thing there. So I like the idea of that, but I also really like the idea of the Portent to draw cards. All I spent this turn was spend mana this turn? I think it was the Roaming Throne, right? So I've only got like, I've only got like 1 mana, 2 mana left, right? Which I left up for the swords. I love the idea of the Portent just to draw me a ton of cards, right? For 3 mana, we just get to draw. Would be 1, 2 right now. For 6 mana, it would be 6. I like the idea that the Myria makes sense. That can start buffing like Skycat Sovereign, so maybe that makes the most sense now that I think about it. The command tower comes in. Again, 2 more counters here, more of a buff here, and I feel like we're just in really good shape. We just need another way to continue to punch through the board. Well, there's the Broker's Ascendancy, you can get more counters on. I can go Murmuration plus the Angel. I could go Murmuration plus the Ascendancy. I could go Angel plus the Ascendancy, just to start getting more counters on. And then the same thing, we attack with 6 birds, right? Double the trigger twice, and I think we're just in good shape. We can knock through all the semantics of it, but I think truthfully, we need to find that good mix. These are printing those 1/1 birds, right? Whenever the lands come in, so we're getting even more creatures for the next one. Right now, we've got the Flawless to protect from 1 destruction-based board wipe. I believe we had the mana up to leave Plowshares up for some removal, and then at the end step, all of them get a counter. So I kind of like that playtest. I think we're looking pretty good on kind of seeing the semantics of it there, and maybe we're starting to realize that those landfall abilities becoming even more important, right? With the fact that we get to put any number of lands, right, that we see onto the battlefield. But let's do one more playtest. Look at a 4-lander here with the Interrupter. There's Zok Katzroy. Whenever it enters, we could search our library for a bird or basic land, reveal it, put it to our hand, then shuffle. So that's interesting. Go get a bird of our choice. And then whenever he attacks, put a counter on target creature, then double the number of counters on it. So very interesting. And then a path. So I don't mind this one. We're going to start off kind of slow, working our way up to our mana. But I don't mind that at all. We can just leave up path on these early turns in case something crazy goes up. Here, I would just hold up the Interrupter. Remember, you can plot a spell. Spell goes into to exile. It could be cast on a later turn without paying its mana cost, but note that it gets anything. So this might just be kind of an effective, fun counter spell, right? And kind of push something out for later. As we come back to our turn, unfortunately, with the two bounce lands, there's nothing we can do to get Choco out this turn. So I'll probably just get a bounce land down and pop this back to my hand, and I'd probably just play this side quest. That gets me one of those bird tokens, and at least we can dump some value in this turn. We don't have 4 more birds this turn, so obviously it can't go off. So we come to our next turn here. This plus the Arcane Signet is enough for Choco. This starts at the first main phase, so we didn't have 4 birds, so it's going to stay out. This will get that buff this turn. We can attack 2 here. I'm trying to decide if it would be worth it. It's just a 3/2. I guess if someone has the board for it, we can. Otherwise, I think we just attack with the Interrupter. And of course, 1 card, meaning it just goes to our hand. But I think we're not looking bad there. There's the Chocobo, which can start growing. Is that going to get us our choice of a bird? It's kind of interesting. I think Castrol is probably one of my favorite picks for the flat-out buffs. There's a lot of options of what it can go get us. So if I go with the Zax's Chocobo, I've got 5 mana left. I was thinking this plus Zac. And then, like I said, Castrol's my first thought, but is there any other better option in the deck that I could think of off the top of my head? I really think it's just Castrol. Really start that bird power train, especially since Castrol doesn't have to attack to do it. We still would have been down on the Chocobo this turn. Go to attack. I guess we can attack 3 this time. Well, this is great. Spara makes that an easy pick. And then we get 2 lands in tapped. That's 2 counters here. This guy and this guy are getting the buffs, making them a little bit nicer attackers. And then, next turn with Cats, we can start getting counters on Choco or, something else. And then as we come to the next turn, we've got that bounce land again. So we'll just tap that for a blue and float it and play this in. There's a land there. That would have triggered, the side quest at the start of our main phase. So when it comes in, we get to search for a land and put in the battlefield tapped. So I guess we wouldn't necessarily had to have picked the island up, but we'll do it just for the purposes of already having missed, right, the quote unquote the trigger. We'll just go get a land and put it in tapped, and then there's that. I'm now just realizing that Black Choco says birds you control get +1/+0, not just it. So that's actually great. Right now it's going to start buffing all of our birds here. So it would have been 1 for the Cascade and 2 for the Chance Race. Now they're all +2/+0, right? Everything except Cat's right? Because he is not a bird, right? So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana to work with. So lots of mana to work with. I like Castrol for 3. Keep up some removal and some counterplay. Go and attack. We see Zach's ability go off, putting a counter on a target creature. I kind of like just putting it on Choco. And then double the number of counters on that creature. I don't remember if I did this for the Dreamlord Cascade, but it's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, I believe, because this just transformed this turn. We would try to knock them at different players for Castrol's ability, if possible, right? Just try to spread that as much as possible. See if we can get Castrol's trigger. But let's Choco for 4. Some really interesting options. Kindred Server could be a nice amount of draw, but we're kind of doing that already. I think I like the Plowshares only because we kind of already have. We have 2 mana up, I believe, right now. Yeah, actually, I think 3 mana up. So this is just more options for removal. 2 lands come in. So you've got 2 counters here. Everything's getting another +2/+0 buff. So I believe all of them are like +4/+0, but plus what they're sitting at, right? I think something like Avon is probably guaranteed to hit it, hopefully at the right person, which is at least 1 Castrol trigger. Maybe we sneak a second one through. I think probably minimum we're doing Castrol's second ability, right, to go ahead and put a counter right on each bird we control just to get, some more value on a future turn. I can put a bird from a hand on the battlefield if I want to. I guess it could be something like like Spara, the cat spells off the top, but I kind of like the idea of just drawing a card, even though our hand's huge. We can just pitch 3 visits, even though 3 visits looks really good with the Chocobo for the free buff, right? But I think we're pretty solid at the moment. Might even be Goi here at this point. And then, hopefully we just did some good damage. Again, this is starting to become a threat. If we can get a trample-based buff to our board. We'll go 1 more turn. Play the island, right? Getting a counter here. They all have flat +1/+0. I like the Extortionist as an option to draw some cards. Spara could allow us to start playing things off the top. I think Ledger Shredder is worth putting in because of its ability. So we'll play the Spara. Ledger Shredder is going to connive. So we draw a card and then pitch a card. Remember, if we pitch a non-land card, it gets a counter. I guess we'll just pitch the Savior. Remember, now we can cast things off the top as long as we remove a counter. That was 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Kazandu feels really good because it's going to start putting counters on a creature we control whenever a land comes in, so that can really help us grow. Now we see Roaming Throne. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. We do have enough mana for the Roaming Throne. I think it's well worth it again to double up on that Choco trigger. And now we just immediately get into combat again. Everything, right? Zach and all these guys can go ahead and attack. On attack, Zach's not a bird, right? So Roaming Throne won't double it up. But I kind of like something like Castrol, right? Make it big. We're going to have a huge chance at Castrol triggers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Choco is going to go off for 6 twice. And again, I think this is just the exact scenario we're looking for this deck. But let me know, what do you think of Choco down in the comment section below? I think this is an interesting place to start. Can learn a lot in testing to kind of iron it out and make it more efficient. But I think it's just a fun way to play birds, especially if you like the Chocobos. This is going to really show them off. And I think as you work your way towards, now that I'm seeing it in more reality, I think I'd work my way towards more counters. We're playing Retreat to Kazandu. but you could play that new Ride the Shapoof. You could play what's it? Roiling Earth. What's the name of that other one that adds counters when lands come in? You could definitely more go into counters if you want to, because Bant's just got options full of that. You've got way more trample options if you want to really ride into that, even though most of our birds are in the air, right? Some of these new birds aren't. But let me know what you think of Choco down in the comment section below, and I will catch you on the next one.